On July 4, 2009, several faculty members of the finance department of Chinese University met up to work overtime at the university to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. 43-year-old Tan Chenghui, a faculty member, was one many had expected to be present, and yet he was nowhere to be found. A man simply referred to as Ma called Chenghui's mobile phone at 11 a.m., but nobody answered. The workload was too heavy for Ma to get too concerned, and he initially wasn't worried because Chenghui's family had adopted a stray dog. However, their dog had a skin disease, and Chenghui had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma wasn't worried and assumed that's what he did. On July 5th, the university's finance department held its work meeting, but Chenghui failed to show up for a second time. Ma once again called his mobile phone and once again was met with no answer. Ma, unfortunately, didn't know his landline phone, so he couldn't call that. On July 6th, it had been 2 days of Ma not showing up to work nor having any contact with his coworkers. Eventually, one of his coworkers reported the situation to the university's finance department. Chenghui's superiors did know his house's landline phone, so they called that number, but just like his cell phone, no one picked up. They then called the library where his 33-year-old wife Tang Anyi worked at. According to the library staff, she was absent from work too and didn't book any days off. The couple were from Zhongshan in mainland China's Guangdong province and were married for 11 years. 11 years prior, Anyi gave birth to their eldest daughter, 10-year-old Tan Zai, and later their youngest daughter, 7-year-old Tan Zaiwei. Although their living conditions and financial situation were not great, and they lived in an abandoned recycling station on Wuzhou South Road, they were described as kind, happy, cheerful, and upbeat people, with their children being well-behaved. Chenghui was known to take his daughters into town to have fun, so many may have thought that the family opted to take a vacation to spend time together, but something came up which stopped them from returning. His colleagues spent the next while repeatedly calling his mobile and house phone in hopes that something different would happen. Eventually, someone finally answered, but rather than being a member of the family, it was a strange, unfamiliar man who sounded middle-aged. The man claimed to be Chenghui's cousin and that the family had gone to Dongtuan in the mainland's Guangdong province for summer vacation, and that Chenghui had gifted him his personal phone for safekeeping. He said he didn't know when the family would return to Hong Kong, and after repeated questions, he hung up and turned the mobile phone off. The only thing this call succeeded in doing was making Chenghui's co-workers even more suspicious and worried. Chenghui was always diligent and measured, having never left work without reason, and if he were to go on a vacation with his children, he would have worked things out with their school first. The family also took care of 9 stray dogs, which left the question of who would be caring for them if they went away to the mainland and how they would afford their vacation to China. Chenghui also used to live with his parents, a father who was a sailor and his mother who worked at a paper mill. However, his father went missing without a trace and was never found, leading to his mother going ill, which left her in a nursing home. It was seen as drastically out of character for Chenghui to abandon her when he visited her weekly. Eventually, they decided to call the police. One of Chenghui's colleagues led the police to Chenghui's home at the abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. On the way there, a curious event had happened. They saw a short man from a distance from the fence of the Tan family and quickly disappearing from view. Initially, nothing was thought of this and they continued on. Once they reached the gate to their home, they found it locked. The police surveyed the property and questioned the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covers an area of nearly 450 square meters. Its construction area is only 90 square meters, and nearly 350 square meters are empty flower beds. The building was also illegal. The original owner randomly built several tin houses on the foundation as a waste recycling site, and the stone house on the other side was used as a pig farm, with almost no people living there. So the police only had one neighbor to question. An elderly woman named Wang, who lived alone across the street, said that she lived in the area for a long time. She knew their schedule and that in the afternoon they usually spent it tending to their garden. But aside from that, she didn't know too much about their personal lives. She said that due to the remote location, the family didn't have many relatives coming to visit. The only acquaintance of theirs that she knew of was Chenghui's middle-aged cousin, simply named Zhu. Wang didn't know much about suicide from overhearing Anyi mentioning that Chenghui's uncle lived in a nearby stone house. Chenghui's colleague told the police about his phone being answered by his cousin, with the police assuming that the man on the other end was Zhu. Wang didn't know Zhu's address or the address of this uncle, but she did hear cries of help from the house on July 5th, so the police mobilized several officers to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village. Investigators later that same day managed to track the man down at a stone house at 74 Wuzhou Road. The man was 42-year-old Zhu Shengqi, and he confirmed that he was Chenghui's cousin. He said that he usually visited the family home to help renovate and work on the garden, and when asked about the contents of the phone call, he stood by his story that the family went to China for vacation. He said that on July 5th, Chenghui visited his mother at the nursing home before returning to the home and telling him that he planned on going to Dongguan, China for a few days. The roaming fee for bringing his Hong Kong mobile phone into the mainland would have been too expensive, so he asked him to hold on to it until he got back. And the person police and Chenghui's colleague witnessed fleeing was actually Zhu leaving after feeding the family dogs. Shengqi's body language and expressions were observed, and he didn't seem the least bit troubled, and there were seemingly no glaring inconsistencies with his story. They asked Shengqi if he had a key to the family home, but he said he didn't. Even though they found Shengqi, the police continued their door-to-door inquiries. Some of the villagers told police that a few days earlier a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager in the village. They later had a heated exchange where she threatened that when Chenghui's mother was hospitalized, he also was in debt for her, and that she would go to their home to collect it if this stranger didn't pay. According to the other villagers, however, the stranger was not Shengqi. But even so, there was now speculation that the family could have gone into hiding to escape their debts and lied to their cousin. Or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Shengqi, that is when they learned that he lied. The villagers confirmed that Shengqi regularly went to the area to maintain and work on the home, and that he was always able to open the gate and door on his own despite no one else being home. To the police, this meant that he must have had a key or access to the home. In fact, he did, because Huang witnessed Chenghui hand the key to Shengqi. He left the key at the university office and asked Shengqi to pick it up for him, and Huang witnessed this exchange. The police returned to Shengqi's home and asked for the key. He again denied owning one and said that he used a spare key for renovations, which he returned and thus didn't have access to, as Shengqi was far less collected compared to his last line of questioning. Shengqi was also deliberately avoiding key details, so when the police threatened to search his home, Shengqi became panicked and suddenly remembered that he had another house key that he didn't return. He retrieved the key from his dresser and gave it to the police. Despite his suspicious behavior, there was no direct evidence linking Shengqi to the disappearance of the family. So the police put him under surveillance while continuing the investigation while using the spare key to investigate the home. The inside of the home was a mess and clearly had been ransacked. Investigators also found several fresh bloodstains on the wall. Judging by the spread of the bloodstains, someone had likely been killed on the property. When police went to the kitchen, they found a sink full of dirty dishes, which poked more holes into the story that they went to China, as they would have left their house a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, the police discovered the family's ID cards in the dresser. The head investigator contacted the border crossing office, and according to them, the family never left Hong Kong. They continued to search the house and found a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in the corner. The police used sniffer dogs to try and find more evidence, or maybe even the family themselves. The dogs picked up a scent, and 9 meters away found bloodstains under freshly turned over soil. And lastly, even though it was summer vacation, the couple's daughters Xiaowen and Zion had signed up for summer school, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation. It became obvious that the family had become victims of foul play, and soon a dedicated task force was established to investigate the case. As it turned out, though, no investigation actually needed to take place. The police, due to the late hour, simply cordoned off the scene and blocked the entrance and exit of Pingqi village to outsiders, while placing Shengqi under house arrest as the main suspect. Shengqi quickly confessed. According to Shengqi, he was from Huangpu in Guangdong province and usually lived with his sister, wife, and a 15-year-old and 16-year-old son who suffered from memory problems. He used to make a living from motorcycles in Zhongshan City, but in 2006 Guangdong's ban on motorcycles for obvious reasons led to a drop in sales in Inca. Due to his financial troubles, he contacted his cousin Tan Chenghui in Hong Kong and asked if he could help find him some work in the city. Chenghui managed to get Shengqi working at a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars, including board and lodging. After half a month of work, Shengqi wasn't satisfied with his salary, and due to company deductions, he was only getting 220 Hong Kong dollars. He quit his job without notice and returned to China in a fit of anger. In 2007, he moved back to Hong Kong due to the extensive damage that Typhoon Pabuk dealt to his home. The repairs would cost a lot of money, so he asked Chenghui to hook him up with employment in Hong Kong again. Chenghui was unable to find anywhere hiring, so he offered to pay Chenghui out of his own salary if he agreed to help work on his own home. Shengqi accepted this offer. So under this arrangement, every other month Shengqi would travel to Hong Kong to do work and odd jobs for the household, often tending to their garden and doing repairs to their home. Then, according to Shengqi, he began to have an affair behind Chenghui's back, which was discovered by Chenghui. On July 3rd, Shengqi went to Hong Kong, and on July 5th took Chenghui to the nursing home to visit his mother. Shengqi then snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Annie, only for Chenghui to unexpectedly return home early. A furious Chenghui charged toward him and tackled him with Shengqi, saying he had murderous intent in his eyes. In desperation, he grabbed a 25 centimeters long fruit knife and stabbed Chenghui until he fell into a pool of blood dead. Annie was understandably terrified by what just happened and wanted to go to the police. Shengqi said that he couldn't let that happen, and since he couldn't dissuade Annie, he decided to kill her too. He found some wires in the corner of the room and charged toward her, knocking her to the ground and tying her hands behind her back. She then covered her mouth and nose with tape and covered her head with a plastic bag. Before this happened, the couple's 2 children were in a bedroom watching cartoons. She screamed at them to run away, but instead ran towards their mother and saw their father dead and Shengqi in the process of killing their mother. They too ran into their room crying and locked the door. Since she was already tied up, Shengqi abandoned Annie to head after them. The wails of Xiao and Xiaoing are what Wang heard. Picking up a pair of pliers, Shengqi pried open the door, and using some more wires, he did what he did to Annie. He tied their hands behind their backs, taped over their mouth and nose, and put a plastic bag over their heads. Shengqi left their bedroom and returned to where he was prior to find that Annie finally stopped breathing. Xiaoin and Xiaoing both suffocated not long after. After killing the whole family, Shengqi was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many blood stains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold the family of 4 and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before the hole back in. The police, while skeptical about his motive, did believe the rest of the story and brought Shengqi to the home, where he pointed to the area that held the sharp knife, a water pipe, a pair of iron pliers, and the other tools used for committing the crime. The police, on July 7th, called the fire department to help with unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and were also wearing gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. They began digging only to very quickly encounter a problem. They hit cement. Shengqi left one detail out in his confession, and that was how he filled the pit with cement before filling it back in. The firefighters were unable to estimate the thickness of the cement, and as it had dried, the tools they brought with them would be incapable of breaking through. The police had to call in a private engineering company, who arrived with their high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. The engineering team seemed to have weak stomachs, as when they drilled through and saw human hair, they suddenly lost their nerve and refused to keep digging, as they didn't want to see a dead body. It took the police a total of 13 hours to finally talk them into continuing. After fully digging through, the pit was found to be 2.4 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The 4 bodies of the family were found at the bottom, all barefoot and only wearing t-shirts and shorts. At the very bottom was Chenghui's body. Both of his hands and feet were tied up with electric wire, and he had suffered multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back, and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. Annie's hands and feet were also tied up with electric wires, and a wire was wrapped around her neck. Her mouth and nose were sealed with a yellow transparent tape. Xiaowen's mouth and nose were covered with tape. Her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. And lastly, Xiaoing's face was distorted. Her hands and feet were bound, her mouth and nose were sealed, and her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Annie, Xiaowen, and Xiaoing had no obvious signs of trauma, which led police to believe they may have been buried alive. Shengqi was formally arrested, and when interrogated, he changed his confession. He said that he lied about the affair, but he did try and start one and come onto Annie. Annie was uncomfortable and told Chenghui about this. Chenghui was enraged and kicked him out of the home and banned him from stepping foot in it again. Afterwards, Shengqi returned to the home anyway to apologize, and surprisingly, Chenghui forgave him. On July 3rd, he returned to the home to start working, and the cousins' relationship seemed to be repaired. Until July 4th, when Shengqi again tried to come onto Annie when Chenghui was away. Shengqi decided to escalate and attempted to molest and fumble with Annie, who ran away and called for help, locking herself in a room. Shengqi, not wanting the neighbors alerted, fled the home in a rage. On July 5th, Shengqi waited for Chenghui to visit his mother at the nursing home to try and force his way into the family home again, claiming that he wanted to issue a second apology. Chenghui was worried that this would happen though, and returned home early to see Shengqi on the property and trying to get inside to speak to Annie again. The two got into an argument where, in the heat of the moment, he stabbed Chenghui of his own volition and not self-defense. The rest of the confession matched the details of his initial one, but with the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was found that Shengqi was still lying. Chenghui's murder was far more brutal than Shengqi had described. Chenghui had suffered from 9 stab wounds on his head and neck, nearly 80 on his body, and 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag, and he had been strangled, with the same being true for Xiaowen. As well, only Xiaowen's cause of death was as Shengqi described. Forensic investigations of the home revealed the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Shengqi, and that Chenghui was not killed in the kitchen. He was likely killed elsewhere, and Annie didn't know until Shengqi attacked her next. The weapon Shengqi used was not a kitchen knife from the family, and instead one of his own, and the cement he used to bury the corpses he purchased before the murder, which spoke to premeditation. Through investigations, the police also found that Annie's bank cards had been used at ATMs after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. And lastly, their cash and bank cards were missing, which meant that the motive was robbery and the crime was premeditated. Like usually, whenever the police pointed out a discrepancy in his story, he suddenly gave a new one. According to Shengqi, his ancestral home in China needed repairs while his 2 children were in school, and urgently needed 100,000 in cash to make the payment. He was not well liked in his local area, so if he asked to borrow money, he'd be denied, and whenever he went to Hong Kong, he didn't make much money, so he turned to Chenghui for help. Shengqi had an idea in his head that Chenghui was a miser who was far richer than he appeared, and that the reason he had a low salary when he worked for Chenghui was because they were using him for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shengqi returned to Hong Kong on his own without telling anyone, and waited until July 5th, when the couple didn't have to go to work. Having a concealed knife on him, he knocked on the door while Chenghui was at the nursing home and talked to Annie. Once Chenghui returned and saw Shengqi there, he asked Annie to cook something while the two talked. Once Annie left to go to the kitchen, Shengqi almost immediately asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Chenghui rejected the request because, while he did have the money, and even more, he had to spend it on his mother's treatment and his daughter's education. Shengqi refused to believe him and accused him of only using him for free and cheap labor. Chenghui was angered by the accusation, and when Shengqi persisted, he ordered him to leave. Once Chenghui turned his back, Shengqi charged towards him and covered his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Xiaowen, and Xiaowen searched around the home for cash and the back cards and then demanded to know the password. Annie purposefully gave a fake password, but at the time Shengqi didn't know this. Shengqi continued to lie about strangling anyone and insisted that he killed the others by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as a plastic bag over their head. When Shengqi left for the nearest ATM, he realized he had been lied to when the PIN number wouldn't work. He returned home to find that in his absence they had all suffocated to death. Shengqi noticed the food that Annie had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses while he thought of how to dispose of the body. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Chenghui's person, he buried the corpses and tools involved in a small pit before going to sleep at his temporary home. The next morning, he woke up and realized that the bodies may be discovered due to the smell escaping from the soil, so he left to buy cement at a store and returned to the home to dig up the pit he had made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole. He would then stay at the home for a little while to answer any calls to Chenghui's cell phone or house phone and tell his story about how he was tasked with looking after things while they went on vacation. Shengqi said he wasn't expecting the charade to be uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shengqi was still lying about many details, such as how he purchased the cement before the murder and the cause of Annie and Xiaoyang's death. But the police at this point had stopped caring about getting a truthful confession, as they felt like they had more than enough evidence to proceed. The trial was held at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010, and he pled not guilty and instead said that his initial story about having an affair with Annie was actually correct, with Chenghui being killed in self-defense and Xiaowen and Xiaoyang being killed accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial motives because he was beaten and tortured by the police, with them strangling him and suffocating him with plastic bags until he gave the confession that they wanted. On November 23rd, the jury returned their verdict and unanimously found him guilty of the murder of Chenghui and Xiaowen. On the charge of murdering Xiaowen, however, he was acquitted and instead found guilty of manslaughter, with the jury split 5-2. This ultimately made no difference, though, as for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter, Shengqi received a life sentence. The presiding judge said that Shengqi was utterly devoid of a conscience, worse than a beast, and completely unrepentant, and accused Shengqi of fabricating the self-defense story and the affair with Annie not to get a lower sentence. but just to smear their good name post-mortem. Interestingly, Shengqi's family living in Hong Kong actually came to his defense, accusing Chenghui of being a hypocrite and the true villain who was draining Shengqi of his money, pocketing money for his work and from Shengqi's salary, and simply using Shengqi for cheap labor. The neighbors and residents of Pingqi village were outraged by these claims, and Shengqi's family moved back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history, and an outpouring of support came to the family, with many visiting the home to give condolences, and netizens raising more than enough money to hold a funeral for the family. The family's 9 stray dogs were also adopted and taken in by another family, who every July 5th would take them for a walk in Pingqi village near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, at the age of 55, Zhu Shengqi passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison of liver cancer.